Yuli, if you'd like to tell people how they can enter if they choose.
Absolutely. The best way to reach us for public comment today is to just send me an email directly at ypadmore, PADMORE at ebparks.org. You can also call 510-544-2002, and I will get back to you because I'm not in the office, but we will be able to get your public comment heard. So that would be the way there. Thank you, Dr. Wieskamp.
Thank you, Yuli. Would you please take the roll?
Yes, so we will start with our directors. We have our chair, Ann Wieskamp.
Here.
President Director Dee Rosario.
Here.
Director Dennis Waspy.
Here.
Legislative and Policy Management Analyst Lisa Baldinger. Government Affairs, Chief of Government Affairs Eric Feeler.
Here.
And then we'll just go with the advocates, and then I'll give a final introduction here. State Advocate Doug Houston.
Yes, present.
Federal Advocate Peter Umhofer.
Here.
And welcoming for the first time our new General Manager, Sabrina Landreth.
Here. Thank you.
Welcome, Sabrina. And
thank you.
So far, you look like you're holding up reasonably well. Congratulations. Anyway,
day 5.
We're pleased to have, survived the week. Very good. Anyway, we're pleased to have you. We have always lots of things to discuss. And I think today we are starting off with federal legislation. And Peter, are you ready to start telling us all about what's going on back there?
Director Wieskamp, can I just make a little bit of an introduction?
Sure.
If I might see if our new general manager would like to say anything to the committee prior to starting, and then I can also then introduce Peter in terms of the legislative actions that we want to take today.
Okay.
Thanks, Eric. No, I don't. Nothing specific other than I'm looking forward to just being a fly on the wall and seeing all the agenda looks awfully full for this committee. So it looks like you all do quite a bit of work through here, and I know how important this is. So just thanks for including me today, and I will try to come to as many of these as I can. But today, just I will just be listening. So thank you.
Thank you. And just by way of introduction, before we get into the first bill, Peter Umhofer has been our legislative advocate now for over 10 years. I think we brought you on during the Tiger II effort, and that was over 10 years ago. So it's been a while. It's been good, very positive. Peter worked on Capitol Hill for Senators Daschle and Harry Reid. He also worked with former Interior Secretary Bruce Babbitt. So he has a lot of experience in Washington, and we're very fortunate that he's helping us navigate that world, especially during these days. So with that, I think the first bill that we wanted to consider is on the surface, it's not necessarily a funding opportunity for the Park District, but in reality, it kind of is, because the more people that vote for bond measures and ballot measures, that helps financially. So I'll let Peter explain the politics of it, but just quickly, it would allow, well, you can read it there. It will allow same-day voting. It addresses a lot of the concerns from this last election that some of the state legislators are rolling back voting rights. And so the Park District, while we don't have those kinds of issues in California, we did think it would be a good expression to support this measure as it moves to the Senate. Peter, do you have information to add on that?
Sure. The bill is an outgrowth, and it was a priority of Democrats when they were elected into the majority in 2018. And so this is, again, a new Congress and an early priority of the new Democratic majority. But I can't think of something more democratic than allowing for people to vote. And obviously some concerns out there. You've probably seen those news reports about efforts underway at the state level to, purge voting rolls. And so the House took action on March 3rd to pass the bill 220 to 210. And so now it has gone to the Senate, and there's great hope and optimism that at least the bill will be brought up for a vote. It could be amended though, and that could be a challenge, just in terms of getting a bill that could come back to the House and pass and be sent to the president. But there'll be some challenges in the Senate, no doubt, as there always is in a 50-50 Senate. But the principles under which this bill is guided are, I think, very important to voting rights, to allowing for people to exercise their right to vote, and even do it within the same day of registering to vote. So I'll leave it there, and happy to move on to the next bill if we want to do that.
Director.
Yeah, I think even though it doesn't directly affect the Park District, I think it's very important to show that we stand in concert with the ideals of voting and voting rights in this country. And I wholeheartedly support us supporting this HR 1. It's too important not to stand up and cast whatever vote, whether it's direct or indirect. I'll leave it at that, but I think it's extremely important, not just for us, but for the country.
I'll say I agree. Okay.
If there are no further questions, the next bill is a repeat. We've considered this legislation in the past and supported it, but it essentially deals with commercial aircraft flying over national parks and public properties, and in this case, a situation that led to the legislation was a helicopter accident actually occurred. So from our standpoint, being able to monitor what's being flown over our parks, whether it be a commercial tour over something like Ohlone or some of our larger parks, or even the ability to control drone flights over our properties. This bill would help with that notion of local control and provide a little bit more security for the Park District, or a little more control for the Park District to limit the flights over our properties. Peter, do you want to add anything to that?
Nothing to add. Very good summary.
And the next bill, the Transportation Alternative Enhancement Act, is actually trying to restore some of the momentum that was behind active transportation, infrastructure improvements for transportation roadways, and making accommodations for plants and things like that to improve them. Also for safe routes to school and recreational trails. All those categories existed before 2015, when all the programs were put into one, essentially a block grant program that was administered to states for distribution and figuring out how they were going to release the funds. That had the maybe intended effect of limiting funding for recreational trails. So as much as we appreciate federal and state money for our paved trail network. Having some funding for recreational trails is also important. And so this legislation would go back to allowing that more stratified suite of trail funding mechanisms through the federal transportation bill. Peter, any?
Just to add on the eligible entities piece, that definition in that bill was something that the Park District, we collectively worked on in previous transportation bills. So the great thing about that work is it's been memorialized, not just in this bill, but in other bills to make sure that the East Bay Regional Park District could compete for these funds. And that's frankly been a 10-year collective effort to, in certain parks in the transportation funding transportation programs that local governmental entities, natural resource agencies, special districts, that language is included in bills. And so I definitely would recommend support for this bill. I can also mention in light of the current conversations that are happening on a transportation and infrastructure bill, I've been in close contact with Senator Padilla's office. He's now on the Environment and Public Works Committee, and I've submitted language to them that tracks very closely with the effort we had with Congressman DeSaulnier last year in the infrastructure and transportation bill to include special districts in 3 different funding programs that would assist in funding pedestrian and bicycle trails for the Park District. So I've expanded that to 5 additional programs. So I'm optimistic about in a transportation and infrastructure bill. The question is how big the infrastructure bill will be. Will it cover transportation, broadband, and a whole host of climate change and other related matters? That's still to be determined. There's an ongoing conversation, but work is underway in crafting that bill, and they will begin. They've started the hearings. They will start to actually write that legislation and what they call marking up, I'd say in about a month. So I've submitted some language to Senator Padilla's office. I've re-engaged with Congressman DeSaulnier's office as we get ready in the House. So that's an ongoing effort. I'll stop there.
Yeah, and I wanted to underscore the importance of advancing this legislation since active transportation came online. And I think California was the first state to really aggregate all of these different sources under active transportation. We've seen a steady uptick of funding available for active transportation, hardscape, significant amount, somewhere in the magnitude of $240 million a year, while at the same time, conversely, we've seen an erosion of funding for recreation trails, natural surface trails in the state of California. If your folks aren't aware, trail usage is the #1 outdoor recreational use in the state of California. So it's this weird incongruity. And to the extent, if this legislation can go forward, I think it sends a signal to California that they could look to their active transportation program and maybe expand the uses beyond their current practices. So,
like a lot of things, this has been, unfortunately, it fell into a party line. It fell into Republican and Democratic issue, and it was a sticking point in previous transportation bills, funding for pedestrian and bicycle trails. Now that Democrats are in the majority, there's an opportunity to build upon previous work and hopefully enhance the funding for these programs. Dee, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was wondering if there is a separate overarching infrastructure bill or act, would this particular legislation be rolled into that, or would it continue to be separate?
Good question. It will be woven in. It may not be this precise bill. It may be a hybrid or a revised version of this, but there's many components. What I've seen in last year's House Transportation Infrastructure Bill was something even better than this bill. Meaning there were at least 3 different places where special districts had access to additional funding on top of what we compete for now. But I'm hopeful that there will potentially be even additional grant programs that will be available. So it'll be very similar to this, plus more.
Great.
So fingers crossed. More
Well,
work to do.
Hey, it sounds positive, so we'll be glad to hope for that, right?
Okay, thanks for that, everybody. The next bill, HR 660, is a one-time $3 billion grant program for projects that are shovel-ready to protect against sea level rise. I know, Peter, you have some thoughts on this legislation as to where it applies. And I think maybe a conversation with the sponsor might be in order in terms of ensuring that the Bay, San Francisco Bay, could potentially be eligible for some of these funds, because we may in fact have some projects that are close to shovel ready. I'm thinking the Hayward shoreline mostly. But Peter, did you have additional thoughts?
Additional thoughts on this. The lead sponsor of this bill comes from one of the territories, the U.S. Virgin Islands. And so it's very much targeted to coastal areas. And, you know, I've not yet engaged with the office about making revisions to it, but I will say this. There are, even in the House infrastructure bill, there was an excellent program for a living shoreline grant program that the Park District was and is eligible for. And so what I would want to engage with them on is going back to that bill from last year that made special districts and the Park District eligible for, if they can weave that into their bill. But I think it's a good thing for the Park District to be supportive of this bill, but it obviously, we would hope it would be strengthened. But again, this is an individual bill. Many of these bills that are being introduced is with the hope that they'll be added to this larger infrastructure legislation that's being worked on.
Okay. Any questions?
So the next bill is the basically the large public lands bill that is moving through, and it has, I think, 3 or 4 different provisions that the district has supported in the past. The first of which is this expansion of the Rosie the Riveter World War II Homefront National Historic Park to include the Nystrom Elementary School. And then the unique thing about Representative DeSaulniers' bill is that while it requires legislation to currently expand the site, this bill would remove that restriction and allow the site to be expanded without specific legislation. So that was something that we supported last Congress. And then of the other bills that we supported last Congress, the most relevant one to the Park District really was the Redwood, the Northwest California Wilderness Recreation Working Forest Act, which included the Redwood Rising and some other elements that we'd been working with Save the Redwoods League on, and would also potentially help bring awareness to our own Reinhardt Redwood Park. So we supported those 2 bills, and then also the Central Coast Heritage and San Gabriel Mountain Foothills legislation last year as well. So we wanted to put this bill forward for approval. And Peter, I know there may be some politics on the Senate side that might be worth pointing out.
Sure. The bill is, many of you, we've talked about this before. It passed during last year's visits to Washington, and we're, at the time, it had just passed the House. We were visiting with Senator Harris's staff. They had some pieces, obviously, that they were very focused on in that office. And I know it was exciting for a lot of the California offices that had pieces as part of that bill. So just recently on February 26th, the House passed this bill that now goes to the Senate. There were, overall, this bill is providing over 1.5 million acres in new protections and most of it is wilderness. In fact, some of these wilderness bills take 10 years to happen. And so it's a pretty big deal. In the Senate, the bill is likely to take some time because there will be other bills that may need to be included. Oftentimes in the Senate, they tend to wait until the end of the year to package together a whole host of bills, 10 to 20 or more of them, and try and have as many Democratic bills as Senate bills. So as fast as the House has worked, it may take a little bit longer for the Senate to take up and move this particular bill because it will probably be bundled, packaged with some other legislation before it comes to the Senate floor.
Okay, moving on, the Parks, Justice and Equity Act. This is a one-time $500 million economic stimulus effort for urban parks throughout the country. It should be something that we would be able to work with our city partners on and potentially receive some funding from. And the other piece that we will be working on with regard to this bill is to make sure that special park districts are eligible. And I am glad to see on the staff memo the notice about our Beacon Economic Study and the amount of money that is generated by our own park projects in the local economy, with the $214 million in economic output just for the upcoming 93 projects that we have ongoing. And I wanted to thank Beacon and thank Lisa for their work on this to get this information out. It was really a treasure trove of data, which we were very happy to have. So I think with that, unless Peter or you have a question, Director Rosario?
Yeah, it says that 50% of the 500 million, 50% is designated for low income communities. Whose definition of low income if we apply for a grant out of this program, whose definition are we using, and what is the definition?
Who has a definition?
I've got a definition there for you, Dee. Poverty level means income poverty guidelines from non-farm population in the United States as prescribed by the Office of Management and Budget. And a qualified urban area means an identified area by the Census Bureau as an area of a population of 30,000 or more. So I don't know if that helps you. I can take it offline and send you some additional information if that's helpful.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. That's a good bill. It's
always,
important. Again,
there's always an issue of what those terms mean. So,
yeah. Yeah, I'll put it in plain English for you.
Great, thank you.
Overall, this is a good bill. There is a standing program that is similar to this, but again, there's a lot of table setting happening right now, priorities for the year and bills that are being introduced now with the hope that they are included in other legislative vehicles that may be moving later in the year. There's obviously a lot of talk about conservation and jobs, and that being a component of an infrastructure bill. I just want to take note of this economic analysis. The Park District is really ahead of so many other entities, and it's wonderful to have, and it's very helpful in talking with the delegation, this analysis, because you're talking about an infrastructure bill. These figures and this data really are helpful to members of Congress. Secondly, Conservation Works for America is a new campaign that started last year that's really ramping up this year. And it is focused on conservation jobs, restoration and jobs. And later I'll send some more information to the group about that, but I just wanted you to be aware of it. You'll start to see it in the media more. There's a whole media campaign and lobbying effort underway to really try and make sure that programs that we've just been talking about make it into any larger infrastructure bill. So great to have that analysis for the Park District. It's really helpful.
Great. Thank you.
Any questions?
Yeah, please, Ann.
Yeah, Director Rossby?
Yeah, thank you. I just want to say I support this bill also, but more specifically, I wanted to agree with you, Eric, that that Beacon economic study, I think, is going to be very, very valuable for us in the future and now. And I'm glad that we keep referring to it, and I hope we continue to, because I think it's a very valuable tool for us.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and appreciate Lisa's work on it. And I also wanted to say, Peter, with regard to Conservation Works, that seems like an audience that we should get that information to, so we can talk offline about how best to do that.
Definitely. I was on a call earlier today and they were talking about it, so happy to connect up on that.
Hey, Eric, what next?
So with that, we've completed the list of bills for approval, and I believe we were asking for a support recommendation for essentially the consent calendar of bills. So I think we want maybe Yuli to call the roll, but go ahead. Or yeah, we need a motion, right?
We need a motion
Support
first.
for all the bills.
Okay.
Second.
Motion from Dennis, second from Dee. Then we'll call for a roll call vote.
All right, President Rosario,
Aye.
Director Waspy,
Aye.
Chair Wieskamp,
Aye,
so moved.
done, passed. All right. First important I is out of the way. Other federal matters?
Thank you. So moving on, the America Rescue Plan, which I'm sure all have been very familiarized with due to the administration's, they're doing a tour to promote it. The one thing that I would just like to point out, and then I'll let Peter speak to it, is just how hard this organization and how hard Peter has worked to try to secure COVID-19 relief funding from the federal government. It's been a real challenge, as in all things, and some of the things Peter just mentioned earlier. You know, it's always a struggle for us to ensure that special districts qualify when we're talking to folks in Washington. And this is one where we've really had a very difficult time getting included as a specific category to really receive local government assistance. We've identified through our finance department at least $3 million of COVID-related expense that's not personnel related, so meaning expense that we would not have had if COVID had not occurred. And we have not been able to figure out the best way to receive relief for that, whether it be through some of these funding packages or through the Federal Emergency Management Agency. But I will say that when, and I'll let Peter speak to it, that when they say local assistance, it does flow to state and local. It does flow to the State Department of Finance, and then from there to the county level governments. And so somewhere in that process, we need to figure out where we can at least apply or understand what the parameters are of how the funding is passed down. And that has been a very difficult thing for us to determine. And I think some of it is because some of the people that will be determining it haven't yet. But we're going to continue to work on it, and it's among our higher priorities for when we're doing our Washington D.C. virtual Washington D.C. visits next month. Peter, if you would like to add anything to that, that would be welcome.
Nope. He's muted. Peter, you're muted.
Sorry about that. We'll give some context to this issue for Sabrina and for others, just for a quick review. So the COVID relief bill that just passed was 1.9 trillion. There was 350 billion in that for states and localities, 195 billion for states, 130 billion for localities. And as Eric rightfully noted, they're in working with staff and the drafters of this legislation, they believe that counties and cities can administer, share, distribute funds to units of local government and special districts. That being said, it's better to be, clearly defined in the statute. And just to quickly go back, in March of 2020, there were 3 COVID bills passed, and then another bill passed in April. And then on May 15th, 2020, there was the HEROES Act. That was $3 trillion, and that had $900 million for states and localities. Then that long discussion of 7 months took place where the House, mostly the Senate, was, again, Republican majority at the time. They weren't really keen on passing and doing much more, but they couldn't get agreement in their own party. So that was the challenge there. So 7 months went by until December when the discussions really accelerated again. And the key sticking points were state and local aid and how much more to provide for unemployment assistance and direct cash payments to individuals. And so state and local was top of mind. It was brought to the highest levels of negotiations. And the good thing is this, is during this pandemic, many members, not only in the delegation, but in key committees and in leadership, got to understand what a special district was, of collective efforts of a lot of folks. And so units of local government and special districts are starting to gain traction. And there was also bills introduced, specifically titled Special Districts Provide Essential Services Act. That was a 5% carve out for special districts in the state and local funding pieces that were in various bills that Congress was existing. Those bills have been reintroduced again. And so lastly, I'll just mention that where I saw the success was not only those individual bills being introduced, but with the working knowledge that many members have about special districts, but more needs to be done. And the loose-knit coalition that was formed, the National Special Districts Coalition, and they really only came into real formation a couple of months ago. So it was a challenge to really ramp up and have success right out of the box when the bills were pretty much written by that point. But the bipartisan Senate COVID bill did include language that would have made special districts eligible. So starting from a real starting point at the beginning of the year, we ended the year with some real, I think, good education and success in actual legislative language. We'll keep working at it, and I think we'll get there. It's gonna take some time. We've obviously been successful in the transportation arena, and I think we'll ultimately be successful here, but it's gonna take more voices and more work. So I'll stop there and happy to answer questions about this.
Okay. Dee?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the Coalition of National Special Districts Association, because it was mentioned at the Alameda County Special Districts Association meeting just recently, and I just wanted to know, is that an organization that you're going to be working closely with in the future?
I'd like to, but I've been underwhelmed, to be honest. But I will continue to engage with them and inform them on things we're doing, but they've got work to do.
Yeah, I think they just, like you said, they're relatively new, and they just established, I think they hired a lobbyist, I think.
Yeah, they've got one in DC, one in Sacramento. One person's affiliated with the Ferguson group, but I can talk about it more offline, but there's more work to do there. And if we put our heads together, I think we can make some progress, but they've got to raise the game.
Okay.
Sounds like you have some useful things you could help them with. Right. So that's good.
Yes, Dennis?
Question?
Well, it's a question. Thank you, Peter. I appreciate your analysis, but my question is really for Eric. Did I hear correctly? So the cost that we've incurred at the East Bay Regional Park District is 3.9 million so far.
The estimate is over 3 million. I don't know that we know that it's 3.9, but it's 3.
Okay, thanks. I misunderstood. Over 3. Thank you.
And I do appreciate Peter's comments about this national organization. It's been a real challenge because there really isn't a national special districts association. The one thing that I'd like to see us maybe engage in, although bandwidth is a question, but the Special Park District Forum in that list, we have used somewhat extensively to mail out, notices and letters, sample letters, and we haven't gotten a ton of feedback on it. But I will say when this bill passed, I did get 3 or 4 emails from other special district park directors or legislative affairs folks asking if we were included. So the word is slowly getting out, but we definitely have more to do.
Takes time.
I just mentioned a couple other quick things before we jump to build grant. Real quickly, Land and Water Conservation Fund, I know that's an area of keen interest to all of us here. There has been ongoing effort by this new administration to make revisions and implement the new law that was passed. As we've talked about before, the previous administration really, as much as they supported the passage of these bills to make it, to fully fund it, to permanently authorize it, they gummed up the works at the end of the administration. And so there's a lot of unwinding and revising of the updating of the program again by the Interior Department staff. So you may have seen that the new administration recently on February 11th restarted the Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership Program. That's a $150 million competitive grant program for urban parks. And so there's a lot of bipartisan support for LWCF, as we all know. I have confidence in the administration. In or around Earth Day, which is April 22nd, they'll be making more announcements about how the Land and Water Conservation Fund and state and local assistance will be proceeding. There's also going to be a White House Climate Change Summit on April 22nd. There's likely to be a national strategy that will be announced at that time. So I'm just putting that on your calendar. That summit may bring together several world leaders with President Biden. So it could be very high level, but there'll also be details shared that I think will be of interest to all of us too. So just wanted to flag that.
Thank you.
Okay.
You want to go on to build?
Yeah, let me just make a brief introduction, and then we also have a Katie with us, our grants manager, to go through some of our current thinking. But Peter, you may have some thoughts as well. Just to put it into context, this is essentially the successor to the transportation investments generating economic recovery, the TIGER program that the Park District was successful in over 10 years ago now. And so it has evolved into a similar program, but slightly different guidelines. I know that some of you were with us about this time last year. Well, actually, it was February last year when we were in DC and met with the Department of Transportation to get some more insight as to the guidelines for this program. And I think based on that conversation, we decided not to apply for a build grant last year. but rather to analyze some potential projects and have the data available for what we think would be a more competitive build application this year. And so we are in the process of doing that. And Katie will speak more to that in her presentation. But I also wanted to flag that obviously we have a new administration with a transportation secretary who comes from a community or is mayor of a community that does have a significant active transportation paved trail network. So we do think some of the guidelines from the in the build grant that were presented to us in Washington last year will be interpreted slightly differently with the new administration, the new Department of Transportation. And I think that's likely to be to the districts, I think to an advantage to some degree. Before I introduce Katie, Peter, did you want to make a few comments about build? It sounded like you had some thoughts.
Peter, you are on mute.
I don't know if it's something on our end or his end, but well, why don't, and I know Peter has a hard stop, but why don't we go ahead and introduce Katie. And I also want to acknowledge Lisa's efforts on the build grant, as well as Sean Dugan. It's been a real team effort to get to this point, and really pleased that we have our grants manager, fully appointed grants manager, Katie Hornbeck, with us.
Sorry, I went offline there. Sorry about that.
Okay. Did you want to, I was just about to introduce Katie. Did you
Sorry.
something to this? Or?
Just to add quickly on build grant, I think it's really important as we get ready to submit an application that we leverage all of our relationships at our very local, state, and federal levels, meaning with our elected officials. It's not essential, but it is helpful to have letters of support and to have those phone calls made, maybe at the right time and right place, to the Department of Transportation after an application has been submitted. You know, as Eric noted, the secretary is someone who is looking at this program and many other things through an active transportation and climate change and resilience lens. Deputy Secretary, who's been nominated, not yet confirmed, we met with someone I worked with in the Senate, but we met with when we were applying for our Tiger II grant. And I think it's safe to say that she was helpful at key moments along that grant being successful. So again, engaging with our delegation, talking about the build grants with our delegation when we do our virtual DC fly-in. I think we have a good team really assembled to put together a good grant application, and I'll leave it there. The last thing I'll say is that by April 26th, the details will be announced, and we'll have, you know, a couple of months to submit an application. They'll make decisions on the grant by the end by September or October. So that's the time frame. The department's already tipped its hand a little bit in other recent grant announcements about how they're looking at criteria or what the criteria will be. So we have a good sense of that already. And but we'll be prepared once the announcement comes out to take the next step forward. And I'll turn it over to Eric and Katie. Thanks.
Thanks, Peter. So again, our new grants manager, fully appointed grants manager, Katie Hornbeck, will lead us through a presentation, a few slides to just inform the board and others on staff where we are in the process. So Katie, if you wouldn't mind starting.
Yeah, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Katie Hornbeck, grants manager.
Today's a brief build grant update, and thank you, Eric, for a really great intro to that, and Peter for the updates as well. Since we're a little bit further along in our timeline, and it's been about a month since you last heard from us, we wanted to just give a quick update, as well as bring our new general manager up to speed on where we're at with the build project. So with that, oh, sorry, will you go back one? So as Eric had mentioned before, this is definitely a team effort, cross-divisional. We have staff from government and legislative affairs, from finance, from DECO and planning. And then eventually we'll be bringing on staff from public affairs who will help us put together a really beautiful application package. Next slide. So as Eric had mentioned, build was previously known as the Tiger Grant. We were successful with Tiger 2 back in 2010. We're awarded around $10 million. Next slide. So we know that these first 4 criteria are sort of the overarching criteria for build. We'll get more specific criteria when that notice of funding opportunity comes out. But you can start kind of clicking through each of these, but the overarching criteria includes safety, traffic congestion relief, regional economic benefit, and regional connectivity. And then these last 2 are really sort of our criteria on what projects should make the final list, and that's readiness. So essentially, can this project get done within the performance period of the grant, which usually is around 3 years. And then the last one is, do we have the required 20% match for each project? So in order to make the final list, the project needs to definitely needs to check those last 2 boxes in addition to being competitive in those first 4 criteria. On this slide, either Lisa or Eric will talk about the projects as it pertains to being distributed across the different wards.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Good afternoon, Lisa Baldinger, Legislative and Policy Management Analyst. So going in to the multi-phase approach of build, we understood that we needed to first get an inventory of what all of the active transportation gaps existed in the district, and that's what you see on the map before you, distributed by ward. Additionally, Eric and I had the privilege of having conversations with each of our board members to understand your priorities, which projects you'd like to see go into the phase 1 assessment for criteria, whether that project is advanced into the ultimate build package, which Katie will really dive into what makes a competitive build package at the end of the day, or as part of the phase 1 assessment, just get a lot of good information about that trail for future active transportation or urban greening grant programs. So holistically, the 21 projects you see before you are definitely on our radar, and we'll be advancing into grant packages in the future, whether it be specifically the build grant or a different grant program.
Thank you. And then the congressional districts.
I think that's my cue. So in the successful Tiger application, we made sure we had a project in each of our representatives' district. And I think that strategy played out very, very well in terms of really having a team effort from our delegation. And at that time, Congressman John Garamendi represented District 11, and Congressman George Miller, there were 2 different districts that actually were kind of merged into District 11, Congressman George Miller's and Congressman John Garamendi's. And those 2, along with Representative Barbara Lee, really acted as a team and really helped us secure that Tiger funding. So this time around, we were showing the map with red dots in everybody in each member's district. And so we're going to try to stick to that. However, in Tiger 2, we did have to move some of the funding around a little bit after we had shown the maps to the members of Congress. And I think one district did not have a project, and that would have been Pete Stark's. But this time we'll do our best. But as Katie indicated, there are some other criteria that really are pretty strict in terms of the 20% match, and a couple of the others that will really help drive where the projects will be located. But also, as Lisa indicated, having an analysis of all these projects is really helpful for future grant applications as well.
Thank you, Eric. Next slide. All right, so this slide is showing our project list. The list is in order of board ward numerically. And then to the next column is showing what congressional district that project is in. As Lisa mentioned, there are a total of 21 projects. In the next column, it lists the estimated total project cost. This was determined in most cases by either engineer cost estimates or previous planning studies. There's a mix of construction projects. There's approximately 9 of those, and then 12 of preliminary engineering only projects, and you see those noted in red. And then the estimated build request. So our build request can be 80% of the total project cost, and then we come in with the 20% match. For the preliminary engineering only projects, the request is 80% of that particular phase of the project. One important thing to note is that there's only $30 million available nationwide for planning grants. So it's going to be an extremely competitive pot of money. So most likely our final project list is going to consist of mainly construction projects because of that. We're also limited to a $25 million ask in the application. As you can see right now, our estimated total build request for all 21 projects is over 70 million. So we think our final list will end up between 8 and 10 projects, is getting close to that $25 million. We'll be getting our data analysis from our consultant probably today, if not the beginning of next week. So once we receive that, we'll see how all of these projects line up against those 4 build criteria and whittle down our list from that perspective. And then we'll look at, as mentioned before, how those projects are distributed across the wards and the congressional districts. And then do we have the match funding? And can the project get done in time? And next slide. All right, thank you. So this is an update on our project timeline. As you can see, in 2019 through 2020, a lot of the effort there was done by Eric and Lisa in talking to our regional partners and doing the federal engagement, and obviously talking to our board and our general manager to see where the priorities were and what projects we wanted to have on our sort of tentative list. And when we created that list of 21 projects, we decided that we wanted to analyze all of them, as Lisa had mentioned earlier, because even if it didn't make our final build list, that information would be critical for future grants. And so now we're kind of heading into the latter part of this second phase of build, which is narrowing down what our final project list will be, and then actually preparing the grant application. And I forgot to mention another aspect that we want to consider, as we look at our project list is we're limited to 30 pages for an application. So in order to, robustly discuss all of the projects, we can't have 21 of those. There wouldn't be enough space to talk about them adequately. So by the end of this month, we hope to have our final project list. And then, as Peter mentioned earlier, the notice of funding opportunity has to be posted by April 26th, if not earlier. And so typically we'll get between 30 and 90 days to prepare the grant application. But we want to get started on that as soon as possible, since we got to get several eyes on that to make sure we're really putting forward a competitive and compelling application. And then we submit the application come May or June. And then I think, that's we're it there. So I'm happy to take any questions at this time, or we also have Sean Dugan here who could speak to any of the projects if there are questions on those. So thank you.
Okay. Questions, comments, or Dee?
Yeah, thank you, Katie. That was a great presentation. Question is, how much detail is needed for those build grant applications? I mean, are they like almost
A lot.
Yeah. Because on 30 pages is not very much.
No, it's not. And you know, Jeff Rasmussen or someone else who was maybe involved in the Tiger process could talk about preparing that application, how much detail is needed. But and just when I was looking at it, you know, in addition to describing the projects, we also need to be talking about our funding strategy and the relationship and engagement with other partners. So it's sort of like you need to say as much as you possibly can in as little space as possible, you know. So we want to, that's why we want to allow ourselves enough time to write this, because we want to convey how important this project is and why we need the money, but we can't. We might only have two to 3 pages to do that. So if anyone else wanted to comment on what exactly would be needed in the. Yeah, go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, thanks. The great overview. Director Rosario, it's all about the pictures. No, I mean, but seriously, we are working with our graphics department as we did with Tiger. And what really, I think because of the short time, application length, data tables showing cost benefit, things like that, like really flashy, like easy to absorb in a short amount of time, I think is really the key.
And what about permits? Is it are projects that have already obtained permits for projects? Are those ones more favorable to the build application?
Peter's nodding his head. Yes. So projects. That's why we're planning on having a mostly construction-oriented final list, because those projects will be, you know, further along in the planning and permitting process. They might already have CEQA done or close to CEQA and be, you know, close to 65 or 90% design. So that's definitely more competitive.
Great. Thank you.
Director Rosario, they tend to ask more questions if we're not completed or 3/4 to 4/5 completed with our permitting. And then they start to say, what if we gave you funding for 6 of the 7? Or what if we gave you funding for 5 of the 7? Or they just tell us that's what they're going to give us funding for.
Yeah, great.
Okay. Dennis, did you have any questions?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think this is a great overview, and I think it's a great strategy. And Peter had mentioned that well, I don't know how you didn't say that it was. I'm wondering how important it is to meet with our legislators, because I know some of my congressman, I think, knows a lot about these projects, is very involved. I'm wondering how we're coordinating our planned virtual meeting in Washington, D.C. Will we have all of these? I don't get the timing down. At the end of March, you have to have it in, and then tell me. But I guess the question is, are we going to be coordinated and ready to go when we meet with our congressional delegations virtually with some of these incredible, like Sean says, picturesque, beautiful trails and pathways and active transportation routes?
Dr. Waspy, it's a really good question, and I would expect that we would be ready.
Good.
Okay, that sounded like a firm statement. I like that.
I sure hope we are, because this is a good opportunity for them to know where we are and when they can plug in to help us.
Wasn't there a safety factor that was going to be involved and evaluated on these projects? Did I see something about that?
Yes, there is a safety criteria, and the guiding question for that is, does the project reduce potential serious injuries or fatalities? So our consultant, sort of how they look at that is, you know, what's the historical data on the number of fatalities that have occurred and what types of those, and then and the potential of how that's reduced if we have this project built.
More data, just a different type. Okay. Well, I think you have a task in front of you, gang. And however we can help you, certainly we all are interested. It's a lot of potential money and it's a lot of good projects. Okay, Eric, anything else?
I have one more.
Looks like Director Rosario has a question.
Oh,
Yeah.
Pete?
So in these applications, after our meeting with ACTC, the Alameda County Transportation Commission, is there room for or possibilities of collaboration in these build grants? Because I'm just thinking of Niles Canyon, because it's not just us that's involved. It definitely involves the canyon or the county. So those possibilities, that kind of collaboration, or is it basically just one agency?
Do you want me to go ahead and take a stab at that, Katie? Or are you?
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, actually, we really valued partnerships in this, and I believe the criteria of Bill does value that as well. If you look at this list, not all of them are. We are not the lead on all of these, and so that the part of our internal criteria was finding projects that may be more ready by other jurisdictions, that we can come in and say, hey, looks like you need some money. Let's be partners as part of a package. And so, yes, the short answer is yes. And you're right about Niles Canyon. That one is, really a county public works project. But the more we can play a role as a partner to help facilitate funding, the more likely that is to actually get built one day.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Comments? Katie?
No, that's it. Thank you very much.
Congratulations, Katie.
Thank you.
Okay. With that, if anybody has anything else, if not, thanks, Sean, for being here. Somebody who's always on the road. Okay, Eric, anything else now? What would you like to go to?
Okay. Well, it's my my pleasure to introduce this item, Strategy for Inclusive Community Engagement and Community Listening Sessions and Survey Update. This is a part of the ongoing project that we took on, that Government Affairs took on under Lisa's management after the Measure FF results came in, and they were 6 to 7 points higher than we had anticipated. So we launched in order to find out who was supporting us that we hadn't been hearing from in our polling. Lisa instigated the Park and Public Interest Survey, which received 8,000 responses. And from that, it led to additional information about where we weren't necessarily hearing or communicating or listening to different parts of the community. And so this year, legislative and policy management analyst Lisa Baldner has taken on a pretty wide swath of projects to do a deeper dive as to how are we engaging with the community or not. And this presentation, she will be joined by the Center for Regional Change from UC Davis, who helped us with the listening sessions. And so with that, I think I would just like to turn it over to Lisa and acknowledge the great work that's been done on this initiative thus far, and I'm sure it will continue. So Lisa.
Thank you. And before passing it over to Carolyn and Brandon and Bernadette, who are awesome partners in this work, I'm going to give a little bit of background to the holistic strategy for inclusive engagement that the Park District is leading. So as Eric shared, this grew out of our 2019 survey where we received over 8,000 responses across the district. Our fantastic GIS team was able to map that out and help us identify geographically low response areas. And also using the survey results, we identified some demographic low areas. And so this led to the strategy, which has 3 key elements to it. One is the facilitated community engagement with the Center for Regional Change, which Carolyn and Brandon will speak to as their presentation. And just to highlight for the board, the other 2 elements are an internal public engagement plan, which Shalana De Silva, professional consultant, is helping us with. And right now, internal interviews of staff teams are occurring to speak to historical successes with engagement, as well as where the district could strengthen its cross-divisional collaboration to build relationships with our external stakeholders and communities. And then the third element are local community information guides, which are essentially, there'll be toolkits broken out by our 6 interpretive zones. And within each toolkit, we'll be sharing demographic and language information, as well as community partners who have been identified, and survey responses over the years of what we've learned from these communities in terms of wants and needs. And so we're hoping to memorialize what we know to date in order to help share and grow our relationships from there. So the overall goal of the strategy for inclusive community engagement is to learn from our 2019 Park and Public Interest Survey and the 2020 scientific follow-up, and develop a coordinated and inclusive process to listen, understand, and engage with the diverse voices of our East Bay communities. It's to use this information to guide new and expanded services, amenities, communication strategies, programming, funding opportunities, and investments for the East Bay Regional Park District. And then lastly, it's to establish a cross-divisional team to consistently update and implement this work. This is not a one-time project. This is something that we'd like to see reoccurring and continue. Relationships are not a one meeting and done. They're an ongoing established communication channel. And so with that, I'm delighted to pass it off to Carolyn and Brandon from the Center for Regional Change.
Awesome. Thank you, Lisa. Hi, everyone. My name is Carolyn Abrams, and I'm a research analyst at the UC Davis Center for Regional Change. I'm joined today with my team, Brandon Louie, Community Engagement Coordinator, and Bernadette Austin, Associate Director at the CRC. And as Lisa mentioned, we've been working in partnership with her and her team to inform the community engagement efforts that are underway with the East Bay Regional Park District. So today, we'd like to share some of our initial findings and feedback that we've heard through our outreach and provide a brief update on the park survey that's being distributed this year. Next slide. So we'll spend most of our time providing some high-level takeaways from our community listening sessions. And then at the end of our presentation, we'll have an opportunity to answer any questions from the group. And with that, next slide, I'm also going to hand it off to Brandon to introduce some of the process that we went through.
Thank you, Carolyn, and good afternoon, everyone. Pleasure to be here, joining you all and partnering on this effort. So Brandon Louie, I'm Community Engagement Coordinator with the UC Davis Center for Regional Change. Just want to talk a little bit about the process that we've undergone so far, particularly around these listening sessions. So as you can see on the slide here, we just finished conducting 3 community listening sessions. Across those 3, we had a total of 45 total participants. We did use a virtual format, so we did them via Zoom and used kind of breakout room features and online virtual whiteboards and other techniques to allow people to engage in multiple ways, but also to the greatest extent possible given current limitations. You could see some of the breakdown of stakeholders, both those who are currently connected to the East Bay Regional Park District via various committees and boards, and then also folks who represented new stakeholder groups, who were some of the groups that had been previously identified through those efforts that Lisa mentioned as being groups that wanted to be kind of connected more to the efforts, both of this outreach effort, but also to the park district in general overall. And so just to give a kind of brief overview about how these listening sessions were conducted and the general organization for them, we did 3 hour-and-a-half long sessions. We provided some context and background related to the community outreach effort, some of the previous efforts that had occurred, and also the objectives for this current effort. We did use some polling to also gauge participants' current level of engagement and interested level of engagement with the park district, and also measuring their kind of social networks and contacts and connections that they themselves might have that could be beneficial for us to utilize and connect with moving forward. And then, as mentioned, we utilized breakout rooms and groups and various online facilitation strategies to be able to engage around a number of questions and get their feedback. And of these 3 listening sessions, the first session was really focused primarily on those current stakeholders, where we the park district did a great job reaching out to folks from all of these various groups and got really fantastic responses of interest. So we had a number of folks join related to some of those pre-existing committees and board groups, and then kind of utilizing snowball sampling from that group and from further outreach conducted by the Park District. We primarily focused on new potential stakeholders and partners in the following 2 sessions. So what we'll do next are to kind of break down the key discussion topic areas and go over some of the highlights from those 3 sessions that we heard, and then provide a little bit of an overview of the next steps, where we're headed next, and then open it up for question and answer. So next slide, please.
Awesome. Thanks, Brandon. So as Brandon mentioned, we spent most of the time in the listening sessions in our breakout groups, where we focused on 3 different topics primarily. So the first thing that we asked the group was really about how or why they want to connect with the Park District. And this was really an opportunity to elaborate on what's drawing them to the Park District and in what ways this has been or could be a valuable resource or relationship. We also focused on how does their community currently access the parks or engage with the district. And so this again was a way to better understand how to expand upon the East Bay Regional Park District strategies that are working well, and things that could be improved. And then finally, we also wanted to identify who is essentially missing or who's been difficult to reach in the past. And so we gathered a lot of feedback about conducting effective outreach, and not only for the purposes of the park survey that's going out this year, but also engaging with East Bay community members for future efforts as well. Next slide, please. And I'll toss it back to Brandon.
All right, so some of the key highlights from the discussion related to people's pre-existing connections with the Park District, or some of the desired connections and the perceived benefits of connecting with the Park District. We definitely heard a lot about strong personal connections and sense of belonging to the parks, particularly for those folks who are already heavily engaged. There was a strong sense of ownership over the parks and what happens there, and definitely a deep love was expressed for parks, particularly people's local parks that many of them had had relationships with even since they were children, right? So definitely a lot of folks who've been in the region for a long time and been longtime allies and advocates. Also recognizing that programmatic partnerships were really key access point for a lot of constituent groups and communities, that it sounds like the Park District has done a really great job in developing partnerships with, community-based organizations, youth-serving organizations, various kind of recreational groups, public health groups and clinics, and that these were really fantastic kind of collective group access points for folks to gain a familiarity with the Park District, to build relationships with it, to get exposed to it, and then to kind of develop and cultivate their own relationships. Definitely heard a lot about all of the fantastic recreational opportunities and educational resources that are provided by the Park District and the various parks as being really key features that were important to people, as well as a means of, cultivating and maintaining their physical health, social and emotional well-being. We did hear interest from a number of groups relating to potential reciprocity projects, so opportunities for things like land tending, restoration, things like that. So could be kind of one-off opportunities, but also opportunities for ongoing relationship building and support. And really just seeing that there are a number of opportunities for people to really kind of connect with others, connect with their community, and then utilize the park system together in collective outings and activities. And next slide, and I'll pass it to Carolyn.
Awesome. So the discussion around how people and how the communities that they represent currently access the park resources and amenities was primarily focused on ways to reduce barriers for individuals and groups to use the parks. And by identifying some of these barriers, we were also able to identify areas of opportunity. So one thing that became apparent was that access issues are both physical and social. And some of the key takeaways so far, and there's much greater detail in the data that we captured, but for the purposes of today, some of the physical barriers included transportation to the parks. A lot of stakeholders mentioned that has been a challenge. And then also in terms of support for seniors, people with mobility concerns, and people with disabilities. There was a lot of consensus around the fact that some of the park facilities could be made more accessible to differently abled people. They currently aren't, but there's a lot of opportunities for that. And then in terms of safety, it was also very clear that perceptions of safety look different for different populations. So this one was not always the traditional notion of safety in terms of law enforcement or park regulation, but rather a sense of feeling comfortable visiting the parks and using the amenities that are offered. And that also overlapped quite a bit with some of the social barriers that were mentioned. So the first one was definitely this importance of feeling welcome in the parks, feeling a sense of belonging, and then also exposure to the parks and the resources that it has to offer. What folks really mentioned with this one was just being aware of what the parks actually have to offer in terms of events, programming, resources, and also the value of these offerings as well. And then finally, some of the other recommendations were around this increased representation of more of the diverse East Bay communities. And that representation was mentioned both in terms of the park staff, but also the park users themselves. And so folks really want to be able to see themselves reflected in these public spaces and feel comfortable being there and participating. And I will toss it back to Brandon.
All right, and so for the final area of interest that we explored with attendees was around brainstorming effective outreach and engagement strategies. So both things that the Park District has already been doing that have worked really well and we should really be looking to continue and expand upon, and then also maybe some potential areas for improvement. We did hear from I would say a fairly diverse group of participants and constituents across the various communities that are served by the Park District. And, this idea kind of piggybacking on the social barrier aspect that Carolyn was just talking about related to kind of inclusivity and representation was really important. And folks, recognized some really important areas to continue working in that particular aspect and some particular, outreach strategies that might be useful and engaging with additional communities that might not be, well represented or might not have as much outreach or connection as we'd like to see. I think some of the important points that did come up repeatedly were around kind of Indigenous tribal communities and the question of Indigenous erasure. And so ways of really uplifting local Indigenous peoples' practices and traditions, but also ways of connecting with a variety of other groups and constituencies around the East Bay. Thinking about language, thinking about interpretive signs, access points. An interesting idea that came up was around the opportunities for potentially using technology, things like augmented reality or virtual reality that could also be useful for things like sign interpretation, for interpretive signage and other kind of points of interest and information around the park. So thinking of some kind of innovative ways to do that. There are a lot of ways that people are getting introduced to the parks. I think virtual programming, probably just because also of the time that we're in now, did come up a lot. And there were a lot of folks who were engaging for the first time with parks and parks programming through a virtual setting. But then through that, creating a familiarity with the parks, with the network, building a relationship so that then the in-person visit, right, wasn't necessarily the first time they felt like they were connecting with the Park District or interacting. So there was a lot of value placed in those, and folks are really excited about those and would like to see those expanded, as well as, of course, in-person offerings. And definitely the partnerships and the program elements that happen through the Park District and with various partners has been really, I think, helpful in increasing exposure and interest and outreach. Normalizing the participation of Black, Indigenous, and people of color within outdoor activities was definitely an important piece. And I think also going back to that questions around defining and establishing safety and a sense of feeling welcome in these spaces. And so, to the extent possible, really reaching out to those trusted partners, those trusted messengers, those community groups that are already embedded within these groups that have those outreach networks and those relationships that are established that can really help support both, the outreach effort that's happening now, but also just building further connections with East Bay Park District in the communities. And that kind of taps into the ideas around peer outreach and direct connections. And, folks had some great ideas and examples to share, thinking about ways of really building a greater urban presence in communities to help the marketing and highlighting of what the park district is and where those local amenities are and what people can do there. Thinking about tapping into local parks that maybe community members might have more familiarity with as another entry point to expose them to the park district and other types of natural resources that they may have nearby at their disposal. And on that tech side, again, thinking about even ways where social media could be utilized, even kind of like a badging system or a way of tracking hiking mileage or things of that nature, how many parks you visited, kind of ways to incentivize participation, incentivize kind of viral marketing and sharing between people, and really increasing folks' knowledge about this system and usage of it in various platforms. So we had a lot of great input, and folks shared a lot of really innovative and interesting ideas with us that we really look forward to elaborating on further in the future. And I'll pass it back to Carolyn to wrap up for us.
Thanks, Brandon. Yeah, just to wrap us up, we'll give you guys a quick update about the survey and how the community listening sessions are going to inform this work. So as far as next steps, and Yuli, I'll have you advance to the next slide really quickly. So next steps, we're continuing to work with Lisa and her team to inform the community outreach plan in terms of how the survey will be distributed. And one thing that's become very clear through the community listening sessions is the fact that, as it's been mentioned before, having these trusted messengers or these trusted relationships with community organizations and advocacy groups is really a perfect avenue to reach a broader and more diverse number of East Bay communities, and ensuring that those folks are actually represented in the survey as well. So a lot of the participants from the community listening sessions will be able to serve that purpose in terms of getting the survey out to a broader audience. So we're now in the process of revising the survey, tweaking some of the questions based on the feedback we received, making sure that we're asking the right questions, and if there are any questions that are missing in terms of gaps in the data or whether it was barriers or opportunities that folks identified, making sure that the survey is tailored to capture that information. And finally, as Lisa mentioned at the beginning, there have been a number of target populations that the Park District has wanted to engage and make sure are captured. And so we were fairly successful during the listening sessions in getting representatives from these different communities. And while we didn't have participants themselves, for example, youth, we had representatives of like youth serving organizations. There are still some groups that we would like to hear from. And so we'll continue to expand our stakeholder list and try and reach those audiences with the distribution of the survey. But again, this is just a reminder of who the focus is on, really capturing feedback from, just to make sure that their voices are heard. And that pretty much covers it. So with that, if there are any questions, we would love to hear them.
Thank you very much. Board, any questions at this time? Dee?
Great presentation. Thank you very much. Two questions. One is 45 people in 3 sessions. Do you think that was enough to give you a sense of our overall communities in 2 counties?
Very difficult.
That's a great question, Dee. Thank you. So I think it was a great start. And as we mentioned at the beginning, Lisa and her team put in a lot of effort in terms of strategically identifying stakeholders, both longstanding stakeholders and new stakeholders. So through that process, the first listening session was really that internal group. And then we leveraged their knowledge of the community to recommend additional stakeholders for us to then invite to the second and third sessions. And this proved to be a very effective strategy, just in terms of expanding our reach, because they seem to know best in terms of, who's not at the table. And then we found that there's been a lot of enthusiasm based on the folks that participated. And so sort of sparking that interest and that enthusiasm early on, I think will lend itself well to a greater participation in the survey itself. So naturally, the outreach doesn't just stop at the listening sessions. That was intended to be just an initial step to get the lay of the land, get folks engaged, and then through that, be able to distribute the survey to a broad audience in the East Bay.
Great. And then my last question is, in your survey update, what are we using for a definition for underserved communities?
Right. So I don't know if we are using a technical definition for underserved communities, but in terms of the populations that have not been well represented in past surveys, I think that's where a lot of the emphasis is going to be placed. And that was where some of these connections were intended to be made with the listening sessions, because in order to establish some of these relationships, that process has to start in a trusted and safe way. So letting folks know, what the survey is all about, the intentions behind it, bringing them to the table, understanding the impact that the survey data can have. I think those are all really important pieces. And so again, we're not using a technical definition, but we're more focused on not only a geographic spread, but in terms of diversity of identity and different demographics. And in terms of age, that's been a large priority.
Excellent, thank you.
Dennis, anything?
Yeah, I thank you for the presentation. I find it very interesting. I hope you can present this to the full board. I think it's valuable, and I think the full board would benefit from this, and the PAC, and probably the foundation also, for that matter. And I have a million questions, but just a couple of come at me. It seems like I hear this all the time, and these surveys have been all the time. People are worried about safety in a park, and people are worried about how to get to a park. So do you ask these questions about how do they deal, or do they feel safer in their community parks? Because every person that we represent either lives in a city or in an unincorporated area represented by, like, Hayward Area Recreation Park District. So do they find the same problems and the same barriers to participation in the parks that are closest to them? I don't think we'll ever solve the transportation problem unless we take over AC Transit, who I have many experiences with. We've asked AC Transit to help us out, and they just say, well, we don't have any money. So I think we really need to ask some questions of what they experience in other places that they recreate. But thanks.
Ask questions. Okay. I would love to see, since I live in East County, and there's also East County, Contra Costa, I'm interested in how many of these people who've been involved live in either of these areas. Because, listen, I represent parks, and I swear that a lot of people don't know the local park from maybe a state park to an East Bay park. And so it's sort of like, we love parks, and we all know zillions of people have been coming to our parks now. Brushy Peak, all these places that they know nothing about. We can know that because they don't follow the rules real well while they're enjoying the park. So I'm wondering about how we reach some of this section, or if we manage to do that. That's a long question.
No, and I think it's a great one. Thank you for bringing that up. And I would need to go back and look more specifically at our stakeholder list, but in terms of the geographic representation based on the organizations that participated and some of the other individual stakeholders, I do think we had quite a range, and we did have folks from the East County. But in terms of the survey itself, I think you make a good point in making sure that we're actually capturing that geographic information will be critical to understanding the feedback that we are receiving, and whether or not this is representative of, a more regional group, or if we're finding concentrations of survey respondents in, more of the urban areas, or, which parts of the counties. So I'll make a note of that for sure.
Thank you. And I'm sure that all of the legislative staff here are thinking about the fact of future going out with the idea of parcel taxes, and what kind of information are we gathering for support from, again, East Contra Costa and East Alameda County, which aren't part of those now. So if we always like to get multiple value out of any of our surveys and projects. because we have limited funds and people will only answer so many questions. But I think you've done a valuable start here, and I think we'll all be interested in the follow-up. Okay, Dee?
Your line of questioning, just want to follow up on your the possibility of parcel taxes in the future. So this is a question for Eric and Lisa. So would this particular survey include questions regarding would people support a parcel tax, or would that be a future survey?
Thank you for your question, President Rosario. This specific survey is intended to understand engagement, barriers, access, and inclusion in our parks, and we're going to be continuing on that trajectory. However, all of this input is incredibly valuable should the park district choose to advance a parcel tax, and we will be using the information learned to fold into a future voter survey specific to investments from a parcel tax. But the intention of this project is community engagement, relationships, and access barriers.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay.
And indeed, just to add to that, I think it's, every time we do a project like this, we are better informed, so that if we are asking voters to vote for something, we have a better idea of where they're at. And so this is really valuable, as Lisa just said, this is really valuable information for multiple purposes. And to your point, I think one of the strategies that we will do with the survey or pursue with the survey is to really try to encourage our sort of the Tri-Valley and the East Contra Costa County elected officials to really get it out amongst the community. We did do that initially to get names for the listening session, the listening sessions that were just completed. But we will continue that effort with getting the written survey out into those specific communities that you cited. And the last thing I wanted to say is thank you, Dee, for your participation in introducing the 2 listening sessions that you were able to attend. So really appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Okay. Well, I think we all think it's a very worthwhile endeavor, and we'll look forward to more information, right? More work from you, all of you, right? But we know how much you like to do this, right? Of course you do. Anyway, thank you so much and good luck on the next steps. Do you need anything more from us?
Yeah, so I just wanted to open it up. We have a few people here and just wanted to give the opportunity for public comment.
Great.
So if there's anyone specifically, if you can raise your hand in the chat or raise your hand visually, and we can just give you a minute to speak.
Signal.
All right. I am, okay. I was wondering if Rochelle would want to speak. Rochelle, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, hi, I'm Rochelle Mason. I'm a member of the Park Advisory Committee and a member of the City Council in Albany, California, and an enthusiastic park user and volunteer. And I wanted to, first of all, thank the staff for this work. I think it's very important. I wanted to bring up my own experience as a regular at the Albany shoreline almost every day, and often introducing myself to park users and asking them about their experience and what brings them there. And I am one of the things that strikes me very strongly, especially with the completion of the Bay Trail, is that people are coming from all over the Bay Area. And of course, a huge percentage were from, that I speak to are from Alameda and Contra Costa counties together, but not necessarily even a majority from Ward 1. They're from all over. And I think that one of the, what I would call sort of an iterative process in the communication between the park district and the community is building that sense of regionalism, and that these parks are serving people across across a wide geographic area that is not necessarily just a municipality or just a ward. And that is especially important when we begin talking about justice and equity. You know, I come from a town that at one time was not welcoming to people of color and kind of diverted people up to Richmond. They're kind of saying, well, why don't you go live up there? And it's really important when we're looking at the needs of our communities that we're looking regionally, and there is no better entity in our area, in my region, I think, than the East Bay Regional Park District for carrying that message and building that sense of identity that's much greater than a town or a ward, but the whole region. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rochelle. And Bernadette, I wasn't sure if you raised your hand or, okay. So I think that's it. We don't have any written public comments. So we're ready to move forward. Thank you.
Julie Lori Gray.
My apologies. Lori Gray?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
First of all, I just want to say how much I appreciated being able to participate in this process and look forward to continuing to participate in future processes around this, and to encourage you, when you create this survey, to figure out a way for people who do not use computers to be able to participate, whether it's you guys set up a hotline that people can call in to answer the survey or figure out another way to do that. And in creating the survey itself, to make sure that it's set up so it doesn't time out. I was not able to participate in it last time because I tried to do it 6 times, and working with a screen reader and dictating my text, it timed out every time before I could finish.
Okay.
So thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you for your comment, Ms. Gray, and appreciate that. So if there are no further comments, we will move forward. And my apologies for missing the raised hand previously. Thank you.
Zooming is zooming. We all understand, right? Okay. Do you need anything?
I just want to thank
Eric.
Director Wieskamp. I just want to thank the Center for Regional Change team. Very professional, very well done. Really looking forward to continuing to work with you all. So thank you for being able to participate today.
They certainly seem very engaged and willing to do more. So good job. Okay. With that, then we're going on to state legislation.
Yeah, and before we we'll hand it over to Doug, our longtime Sacramento advocate. So thanks for being here, Doug. But before we hand it over and kind of go through the bills, I would like to make a procedural request, Chair Wieskamp. Item number 9, SB 804. We received some information yesterday about Senator Glazer's bill on formerly incarcerated inmates and fire training center that I think informed us that perhaps we should watch this bill for now, as opposed to having it listed along with the other bills recommended for support. So if we could pull that item for a watch, I think that would be advisable.
We will take your advice, I am sure. All right, then on to Doug.
We ready?
We're ready.
Okay,
ready.
Let's see if I can contribute more to this marathon legislative session we're having here.
Okay, go for it.
I'll try to be brief, folks. So our first piece of legislation, AB 897, this is actually a vestige, a carried forward from last year's Assemblymember Mullins 2621. I get the operating premise on this piece of legislation is that not every region is the same. So what the bill is trying to do, and there are these units called regional collaboratives throughout the state. And I think what the bill's trying to do is sort of formalize these, memorialize these through legislation. The bill, you know, it wants to work and aggregate some of the thought shapers and thought leaders in the various regions throughout the state, bring them together to help to fund planning around adaptation, resiliency that makes sense to those regions. You know, for example, obviously, you know, sea level rise is not going to mean all that much to the folks in Sierra, and conversely, you know, woodland issues, fire related issues around forestry are not going to mean that much to folks in the Coachella Valley, as would extreme heat. So that's what this bill is trying to do. I think memorialize what have been collaboratives into what are regional, I'm blanking on, climate networks. Provide the funding, put together the planning, and then to start to deploy funding in these various regions to address the priorities for the various regions. Anything, Eric, Lisa?
Dave?
Yeah. So who makes the decision as to which people belong in the network?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know if the legislation speaks to that specifically. It talks about eligibility. So I think it wants to tap sort of the, you know, academic world, local government world, a host of folks that, you know, have dabbled in climate action activity, bring them together to sit around and collaborate over, you know, moving forward, a pathway forward, and how to deploy resources and shape policy around best practices in trying to address climate resiliency and adaptation in those particular regions.
Yeah, and I think that's well put, Doug. I think the there's a wide range of bills or pieces of legislation around these kind of regional adaptation mitigation efforts. And I think a definition or a formula for who is participating in what network, that's probably being defined and probably will be defined by the different bills that are out there. I think this is probably the fourth one we've considered already this year on kind of these regional notions. But what I really wanted to just emphasize is I think it's very beneficial for the Park District to have these kinds of networks moving forward, because as we know, we're protecting 55 miles of shoreline, basically with our trails and our wetlands restoration projects. And that in turn is protecting a lot of infrastructure inland. And we're not receiving any funding for doing that. From the communities that are behind the shoreline. So a regional effort to look into providing more resources, because we know how astronomically expensive some of these projects are going to be, is super important. So that's one of the reasons we really want to keep tracking these kinds of regional collaborative efforts.
And if I may jump in for the benefit of the board, and we can include this definition in our formal staff report to the full board, as defined in this piece of legislation, a regional network is 2 or more eligible entities whose combined jurisdiction enhances their effectiveness to respond to climate risks. So it could be East Bay Regional Park District and one other entity could constitute a regional network per this legislation.
Okay.
And not to go too far into the weeds, as Eric had mentioned, there's a host of bills that are advancing on this topic. This will probably advance a little faster than others. Assemblymember Mullen has sort of carved out space around this particular issue area, and it more than likely is going to get folded into the bond that we'll talk about a little later, AB 1500. This piece of legislation will really inform how the money that is included in either AB 1500 or SB 45 is going to be allocated in what fashion. So more to be determined.
Time.
Yeah. So if I could take these sort of as a package, item number 2 and then item number 4. Both of these bills were introduced by a member of our delegation, Assembly Member Frazier, and I think he did so in the wake of the complex fire. In talking to the Assembly Member's office, they are spot bills. They're not quite, they don't have them fleshed out quite yet, and they're not certain thematically if they're going to stick with what's being proposed, but I'll be real brief on both bills. So the first bill, 909, would require Department CAL FIRE to work with California Fire Science Consortium, Department of Insurance to develop a fire risk assessment map. They want to do a mapping based on, from my read, every parcel in the state of California and quantify the risks associated with fire risks associated with those parcels for 50-year periods, and then update the map periodically. I think that's pretty ambitious.
Very ambitious.
It's going to require a lot of data gathering. So again, this is a spot bill, and I think in time it'll be fleshed out, or perhaps not. I think these are 2 of the 5 or 6 bills that Assemblymember Frazier is carrying, and I know fire risk, forest health is a priority of his district right now, and again, in light of recent fires. Item number, real quick, if I can just jump over 3 and then go to 4, Yuli, sorry, just so we can package these. So this is the other bill, another spot bill. Bill would seek to create a WUI Fire Research Center. And I think the purpose of this is to have a more heavily concentrated lens on issues, funding, policy matters, implementation of policy as it relates to WUIs. Create sort of a think tank around this issue area. Again, spot bill. It's a little granular in terms of the implementation and why WUI specific. I think for a lot of folks, it might make some sense. But in my discussions with people, committee consultants, I think they're going to take a more holistic approach to addressing fire going forward. So stay tuned. So if we can go back to item number 3, Yuli, thank you so much. So
I was just going to say, Doug, sorry if I just on those Frazier bills and some of the other fire bills, I think you're correct that there will be a combined effort over time, and there is, and we'll get to this later, I guess, but there is a lot of concern in Sacramento about fire and how to manage better, and we are seeing the trend toward trying to do preventative measures first, and not have to to reduce the risk of the catastrophic fire. Mm-hmm. We want to make sure that we're tracking these and that we have the pieces that go into whatever the ultimate package is, that we're able to say that we support all the efforts that are going to go into it. So just wanted to make that point that I agree. I think there will be a combination of a lot of these bills.
Exactly. Thank you. Board members, President, I don't know if you're aware of it. We're sponsoring legislation this year, and that is this bill, AB 5959. And we're working in conjunction, primarily, at least for now, with Mid-Peninsula, although there are 2 other affected entities. And essentially what we're looking to do is to create in law a little bit more affirmative, deliberative set of legal tools that can be at the district's disposal with respect to corrective actions when folks are doing things they shouldn't be doing on our properties, unauthorized activities. So essentially what this bill would do through ordinance is give us the ability to abate nuisances. Right now, if, for example, somebody is doing some unauthorized activities on our lands, we can issue fines, citations. But in order to abate, recover costs, we need to elevate it to the district attorney level. And of course, they're up to their necks in more serious issues and legal matters. So what we're trying to do is we're taking law as it relates to cities and counties and applying it, at least at this juncture, specifically to Public Resource Code section districts 5500.
And I just, Director Rosario?
Is there any pushback to what we're proposing?
Great question. We had to, in order to advance this bill through Assembly Member Mullen, we had to do our due diligence, and so we were asked to speak to a host of groups, CSAC, League of California Cities, district attorneys, Special Districts Association, and to an organization, no. In fact, I think the DAs were they were supportive of the concept, try to alleviate some of their caseload.
That's good to hear.
Yeah, and it's pretty narrow, Dee. It's for 4 districts throughout the state. So we don't really foresee any opposition. I did want to, and I see Rachel's here, and I did want to acknowledge our legal counsel team that really inspired this effort. I think when we first brought it to the committee to ask for the go ahead to work on legislation, that Jason Rosenberg was helping us present, but Rachel's been tracking it, and I know District Council Carol Victor has been very supportive. So this is, and we have I think, Lisa, if I'm right, I think we have something like 400 neighbors. So it's really a piece for our legal team. So just wanted to acknowledge that. And I think Rachel wants to speak.
Thank you, Eric, and good afternoon, everyone. Rachel Sater, Assistant District Counsel. Thank you, Doug and Eric, for that introduction. It was absolutely spot on. This has been something that's been a priority of District Counsel Carol Victor's for a while. Jason Rosenberg took it up and did terrific work. The issue is that we get encroachments that run from people throwing yard waste, construction materials, refuse over their fences onto our property, to people actually extending their yards, hardscape, and even buildings onto our property. And currently we have very limited tools, and they require us to put significant investment into enforcement that we cannot then later recover in the form of attorney's fees. So we see that this is a very important tool. And we're very excited that it's moving forward, and very grateful and appreciative of the Governmental Affairs Division for moving it.
Thank you for saying that. And we should also acknowledge Mid-Peninsula and their government affairs team and legal team really working in tandem with us and actually getting Assemblymember Mullen to introduce the bill and make it one of his priorities. Folks should know that the Assembly members, and I believe senators as well, are limited in their amount of bills they can introduce this year. So the fact that Assemblymember Mullen did put this in his list is a really significant, and we really appreciate it.
Great.
Good acknowledgement.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on. So folks probably remember there was this item on the ballot a couple years ago, Proposition 68. District worked very diligently in trying to include language in Prop 68. That was, of course, a benefit to the district. That included a robust per capita program, something called the RIRE program, which we call a self-help program. So, in our case, in the case of other very limited number of local agencies across the state, if you were successful in improving special taxes, you would be entitled to a special block grant of money through Prop 68. And we were only a handful of agencies that benefited through that. But it was, with the passage of Prop 68, which was of terrific benefit, there was this lingering thought that we left a lot on the table, that it should have been bigger, should have been more comprehensive and robust in terms of funding for resources and for parks. Unfortunately, we were hamstrung to a degree because then Governor Brown put a cap of $4 billion on what he would and wouldn't sign relative to a parks and resources bond. So we had to work in that context. But since that time, we've seen subsequent bills that touch on parks and resources, but have sort of pivoted around, this elevated theme of climate. We've been watching with interest last year, the year previous, there was SB 45 through the Senate, AB 3256, and both of them stalled out due to a less than positive signal from the administration. So this year, I think we've already taken action or consideration of a bond on the Senate side, SB 45. And now before you is the Assembly companion piece. It's AB 15 that's been jointly introduced by Eduardo Garcia, champion of parks, and then again, Kevin Mullen. Has a lot of terrific provisions in it, a lot of funding opportunities. There's a wildfire chapter with lots of money for pre-hazard mitigation. There's money through a per capita program that we had the good opportunity, good fortune, we being Eric, myself. I don't know if Lisa was part of the call, but we were invited to have a client call with the people staffing this bill in Water Parks and Wildlife just this week. And, or was it last week? Good conversation. There's a number of items that, again, are a benefit to the district, but there are deficiencies, in our opinion, associated with this bond. And one of those deficiencies in particular, under the coastal, if you stop right there, Yuli, it'd be great, coastal and ocean climate risks. So there's a lot of money that they're making available through the Coastal Conservancy. And a sizable tranche of that is getting redirected back through the Bay Restoration Authority, which, again, good program, benefits the district. I think we were just awarded a considerable amount of money through the authority. However, the reach and scope of the authority is somewhat limited as compared to the Bay Area program. So what we're hoping to do, and we've articulated this to staff, is we'd like to see, it's part of sort of an aggregate or collective ask out of conservation folks in the Bay Area, and that is to increase the amount that's made available to the Bay Area program from its current $10 million to $100 million. That brings in interest from other counties within the Bay Area region who are not eligible to apply for the Restoration Authority funds. But that's one of our key asks. Another one is ramping up the per capita program. And then it should be noted that this bond, AB 1500 versus SB 45, because Assemblymember Garcia is involved, he wants to make sure that parks are recognized and that there's a substantial amount of money that's available for park purposes. So there's actually a section in this bond to continue on with what's called the statewide park program. And that is primarily money for new parks and disadvantaged communities. And I do believe we have at least one grant that was submitted last Friday through this program. And we have been awarded some funding through this program in the past. So again, this bond is littered with really good funding opportunities. I think it's not going to be static. The committee and Assemblymember Garcia are listening or gathering feedback. They want to move it from its current level to probably somewhere just south of $8 billion ultimately, but a lot of that is contingent upon polling and what the voters' appetite might be. Questions?
Well, I'd like to add, just before we do the questions, that we did have a fortunate opportunity to speak with some of the staff that are working on the bill, and they did indicate a better than 50% chance of something moving forward. And they also indicated a possible June 2022 measure, which would actually work very well for the Park District. And then I did want to acknowledge on the per capita, which is in Chapter 2, the 150 million is really not nearly enough. But I wanted to acknowledge that we've been joined for this meeting by Bob Doyle, who in Prop 68 did want to make sure we got per capita back in these bonds, and we actually were able to, even though it was woefully underfunded. But I think his point is proven by the fact that it got in last time and now it's in again. So that's the exact type of strategy that we were trying to pursue, and just wanted to acknowledge Bob's role in that. And that money would not have been in Prop 68 without the Park District and Bob's leadership. But I do think on this particular bond, the 150, we're gonna. I think we should advocate for 500 million. That's what it's been historically in the Gray Davis Park bonds. And then on the Bay program, with regard to the Coastal Conservancy, our request really is that there should be parity for between the Bay program and the San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority. They should not be that far differentiated at all, and really should be at the same level. So whether it's both at 100 million or both at 300 million, wherever it lands, we really just want to make sure that the numbers match up, because the Bay program is just much more flexible money for us and has historically benefited the district a great deal. So I just wanted to add those pieces.
Wherever he is, we thank Bob. We know that. And he doesn't forget us, I know. Okay, what else?
You have any questions?
Question, anybody?
It's a very evolving process. I suspect there's not a high level of confidence that they'll be able to advance this year without a clearer signal from the administration, which puts everybody in sort of a precarious position if it's carried forward to next year, because there'll be such a abbreviated or truncated campaign window. If you were to get something done by March, virtually impossible to run a robust campaign for something in June. So we'll have to see.
And if I may add one more comment on behalf of the meetings with the Together Bay Area Policy Committee, and something I kind of wanted to add because of Director Rosario's interesting definitions today. Together Bay Area's main focus for this bond will be the Bay program and ensuring that the Upland grant program matches the Shoreline grant program, but also the definition within the bond currently is stated as disadvantaged communities. And in the legislative definition, we would like to bring that, for lack of a better phrase, up a level to be vulnerable communities, which the Bay Area, our cohort feels is more inclusive of the urban distribution of economics within, I don't have all the right words, but within the Bay Area. And so the vulnerable communities, just because of the way our urban communities are laid out, would help us best serve our lower income communities. So I did want to share that as a key focus area of the Together Bay Area Policy Committee.
And Dee, let me just really quick build off of what Lisa just said, because I know you've expressed interest in the definition of disadvantage. So there's been a big push through this agency and through MidPen and others to create sort of this new definition of what under-resourced communities, something. But the theory is that it's disadvantaged in proportion to the larger community, meaning that you have these pockets where the median income might be in the Bay Area, for example, $85,000, which is above the statewide average. But those communities can't compete for funding when compared to other communities in the state, simply because, let's say, take the city of Bell, where, the median income might be $45,000. That's, 80% below the median income. So they're trying to do this, put together sort of a regional formula and distribution as it relates to disadvantaged communities. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So I'm sorry, then your question.
I think that was my question.
Oh.
No, there was something else now.
Let your brain relax and then you'll come up with.
I'll be here, Dee.
Okay.
Or you can call me later.
Oh, I know what it was. Do you think the administration is reluctant just because Prop 68 still hasn't been fully rolled out yet, or?
Yeah, so they've, they've done, the funding agencies have done a really good job of getting those funds out there. I would say probably 85% of the available funds have been appropriated, Dee, maybe more. So I don't know if that would be an argument against advancing something. If there is an argument to be made, I don't know, maybe I'm speaking out of school, but I think part of the challenge right now is we're sort of swimming in an embarrassment of riches. I mean, believe it or not, post-COVID, we're looking at, I heard numbers a couple days ago from someone with the administration that it's conceivable that we might be looking at a $50+ billion surplus between the combination of our own surplus, GGRF revenues were up unanticipated levels, and we've got $26 billion coming in from the feds. So there is this argument that can be made. We've got this money, we need to spend it on a one-time basis. Why are we looking to incur more debt when we might be able to redirect some of these existing resources for resource-related purposes? I think that might present some challenges going forward. I don't know. I think the recall has definitely had implications on messaging coming out of the administration. We should know more come May when the revise is announced. And hopefully there'll be some signals around their willingness to work on a bond or not work on a bond, or at least at some point work on a bond. We know that the resources agencies thinks very favorably about this, but we're not hearing out of the horseshoe anything definitive at this juncture. So that's long-winded way of saying, fingers crossed.
Wait and see.
And indeed, to your question, the resources that Doug was just speaking of would be one-time opportunities, and these are obviously, especially with fire and shoreline resiliency, these are hugely expensive and long-term needs, and so I think that both are needed, and that I think I'm encouraged by the tone of this bond that is moving more toward the wildfire and climate and resource needs, and away from it being a water bond, a park bond that's disguised as a water bond, or vice versa. So I do think both might be possible, and actually, in fact, there is need for both. And I do see former General Manager Doyle has a yellow hand raised.
Where is he? Wherever your hand is, I recognize.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I think I recognize the beard. Come on.
Yeah, the man with the beard.
Yeah.
Just good afternoon, everybody. Thank you. Just some brief comments. We have tried for the disadvantaged communities in places like Richmond and other places. And because of the geography of the bay, they have done it with basically a circle with a dot in the middle, and then did that calculation. Well, if 2/3 of that area is water, we get no credit, even though it's a disadvantaged community. So that's been one of the frustrations for, I would even think San Diego, anywhere with a large bay where a portion of the underserved population got water surrounding them, it's very hard to get the points you need for that money. So that's something that a lot of people are interested in. It was really focused on kind of central Los Angeles and giving parks to those underserved communities, but nobody thought about bays and shorelines and points and things like that. The other one to remember is that while we have taken very good advantage at the East Bay Regional Park District of the Bay Area program, the money that comes from the Bay Authority is only for shoreline. And we are disadvantaged because so much of our 55 miles and more is urban, right up against railroads, right up against communities. So it's very hard to get a lot of money for wetland restoration because it's shoreline, but it's not wetlands. And so that has been a big challenge for us. Whereas the Bay Area program of the Coastal Conservancy, which by the way, we delivered the winning vote to establish that with our Assemblywoman Lynn Leach at the time. That was the final and needed Republican vote to get that passed. That has been very, very beneficial. And it also is a place where we could go from the bay up the watersheds into creeks and into upland that has watershed protection. You can't do that with the Bay Authority. So that's why the Bay Area program is flexible and so important. And finally, on the per capita discussion, so pleased to see per capita being included. One of the challenges that particularly our advocate Doug Houston had last time, who worked so hard on this, was that a lot of local cities and smaller populations got very little money. In fact, large populations like LA were not that excited because it was such a small amount of money they get for the effort when they were passing their own tax measures locally. So we did not get as much enthusiasm and delegation support from other areas because it was not a lot of money. So we basically are trying to tell everybody we want to get the wheels back on the train, get it on the tracks, and then come back later. And this is our opportunity. But it's going to take a lot of effort to get other cities and other organizations to really engage on per capita because they just never see it as a lot of money for them. You know, if they get $20,000 or $50,000 out of a $5 million project, how much effort are they really going to make? So I just wanted to point that out, and just congratulations to Katie and congratulations to your new general manager, and great to see everybody. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you. Stay engaged, stay gardening. Nice to see him again.
Yes.
Okay.
Very good. Should we move on, Madam Chair?
I think we can move on. Why
Very
not?
good. Real quick, SB 556. This is introduced by Senator Laird, our former Natural Resources Secretary. And it proposes to require Department of Forestry to work with OPR and the Natural Resources Agency to develop a long-term forest management plan, very high level, very comprehensive forest management plan. And I think that, to this point, we haven't had one. Our approach to reducing fire risk has been pretty fragmented. And so I'm thinking through this action, through these activities, they're hoping to put together a plan to put before the legislature that will inform decision-making around funding, best practices, using existing programs, so that, again, that we are deploying resources in a pragmatic and meaningful way to reduce risk and fire risks throughout the state.
Okay.
Good.
Sensible idea.
Yeah.
What chance does it have?
Great question. Good author. I suspect he knows something we probably don't know in his, his former capacity as Resources Secretary. He probably saw that there was a gap, and now he's in a different set of shoes where he can, advance things that can address those deficient areas that he recognized when he was in that position. So we shall see.
Okay.
Yeah.
SB 604, Senator Hueso from San Diego. This is actually a carry forward from another bill, 1296 from last year. So it's a career pathways climate resiliency program, which would require the WCB and the conservancies to develop their grant programs within their own organizations, and look at ways to fund projects that address climate resiliency and adaptation. Really try to address some of the activities around climate, but in doing so, deploying resources and using those resources, you get folks into workforce development type programs, green jobs, durable green jobs, lasting green jobs through these grant programs. So something, I think is very meritorious. I think we had supported 1296 last year. So again, we'll see how this goes. I like the Mullen bill I referenced early on about climate collaboratives. I think this too will be rolled in or folded into a climate bond. A lot of the provisions. I think that when there are going to be resources deployed through bond dollars, that there's going to be green jobs and targeted jobs and targeting disadvantaged populations to provide for those pathways, career pathways into the green economy.
I think you're right, Doug. And I just wanted to add on this particular bill, we did sponsor it support it last year. But one thing I do think, and I don't think we put it in the memo, but that is significant, is that it's requiring the conservancies to build into their grant programming the idea to create these career pathways. And that's significant in that some of our state's conservancies are in more rural areas that are frankly more impacted by fire and climate impacts in some ways. And so this is a great way to promote jobs in those areas, fund them, and also have individuals on a career pathway to work in our industry. And I just think it's kind of a win-win legislation, and I'm really glad we're considering it.
Yeah.
I think it's also an excellent way to involve the educational community, area community colleges, high schools, and all the rest of them, because a lot of programs have almost been gone from becoming mechanics to whatever. And I think this would be an opportunity to work with the educational community to see how they could be part of it.
Yeah, in fact, to your point, Director Wieskamp, that the fire training center concept that we'll talk about later is really something that community colleges generally are the leads in, and there is a need for more of that activity. There's just not enough training centers in the state.
Okay, looks good. Oh, here comes Tesla.
Oh yeah, so moving on to, not a very acrimonious topic at all. So this is iteration at least 3, 4. An effort by Senator Glazier, co-authored by Rebecca Bauer-Cahan, and it's looking to designate or preserve a portion of the expansion area for conservation purposes out at Tesla. In addition to that, to true up what would be the loss in the OHV account for the money spent on the acquisition of this project or the land long ago. Bill would require an appropriation of $9 million to backfill the loss for the acquisition cost of the property. The summary notes the level of support. We know that there's been a recent settlement, or at least finding out of, was it the Superior Court level, on the inadequacy of the CEQA content and the CEQA information documents down there. And it's our understanding, at least for now, that DPR and the Resources Agency are doubling down, and they're intending to go back through the CEQA process to try to address some of the deficiencies in the first go around with CEQA. So never-ending saga, and you know, let's all strap in, because this is gonna, I don't know if it's ever going to get resolved, but we need to continue to work on this project for sure.
We never give up.
Things just never go away.
Well, thanks, Senator Glazer, for his continuation.
Yeah. So Eric, how do you want to handle this final matter here? We took it off of,
I think
consent support, but it's a watch.
I think we should ask for a motion to support the previously discussed state legislation, and then move 804 as a separate, pull it off of the agenda and move it forward as a separate item.
Sure.
All right, do I have a motion to move everything through 8 forward?
So moved.
Second by Dennis. Any questions?
Yeah, are you going to tell us why? We're moving the one to the watch. What changed?
We had a significant meeting with folks at the Conservation Corps yesterday, and I think the nature of this bill is still evolving, and we don't really know where it's going to land. So rather than bring it forward for support right now, I think it would be smart to watch it and maybe support it later. It was clear that the author's intent is to help provide jobs for folks and help to work on the fire-related issues. But it's unclear to us if the author really understands the amount of resources it would take to actually construct a fire training center. And our fire chief, Eileen, was on in the meeting, and I think would be hesitant to support something like that if it was if they were looking for property to put that kind of center on, and looking to the district for that kind of property. It just would be incompatible with our mission, and we don't know if that's where it's heading. But I think staff would advise moving it to a watch position. We can talk more about the actual bill if you want, but I was hoping to take a separate vote on it.
Sure, no, I'm perfectly okay with it, and I'll accept your recommendation.
Okay, so we have a motion for 1 through 8. Any discussion? Any other questions? All right, I'll call for a roll call vote.
All right, President Rosario.
Aye.
Director Waspy.
Aye.
And Chair Wieskamp.
Yes. Aye. Motion passes. And for 9, perhaps a motion to keep this and watch it. Do we need that or not? We need a motion, Eric?
I don't think we necessarily need a motion for a watch.
Just sort of advice that that's what you're going to be doing and bring it back.
Yeah. Yes, and we remain in close contact with the senator's office on this proposal, and we'll continue to do that. And if there is an outcome that can be something that we can support, then I think we'll bring it back to this committee.
But I certainly appreciate our fire chief's concerns and want to make sure that she's happy with it. How's that? Because I think she's got the best interest of the park district at heart. Okay, anything further?
Dee had a question.
Yeah, I just, Eric, you mentioned that there was some concern about the cost of building a new fire center. Weren't we actively looking at sites in the Park District that might be able to host a center?
Yeah, well, so that's a really good point, Director Rosario. I think there are two issues, and they were being confused by a number of people, including me.
Okay. That happens.
So we are looking for the establishment of a Conservation Corps, California Conservation Corps crew or 2 crews, which would be about 30.
We
Looks
froze.
like he froze. So I can go ahead and jump in.
Or I can help too, Lisa, if you want.
So for our meeting yesterday, we identified 2 separate discussions that we were having with the California Conservation Corps. One began about 3 years ago when we went on a tour with the director of sites across the East Bay with discussions of bringing their Solano satellite camp down to a facility within the East Bay. For that purpose, the Conservation Corps was looking for a site that could fit 2 crews of 15 crew members each, of 18 to 25-year-olds to provide for workforce development while doing forestry vegetation management. More recently, Senator Glazier's office has approached the Park District to begin conversations around a training facility that would be based off of a Ventura training camp model to train formerly incarcerated individuals on forest management techniques. It would intended to be an 18-month program, ultimately leading to CAL FIRE positions. And so when discussing with the Senator's office the different roles of the different stakeholders, it's been shared with us that the role of the Park District would be the location of the training center. And so of course that sparked our interest to learn a little bit more of Ventura Training Center. And the sort of training center they're looking to put, as our understanding is currently, is very much hardscape and gray materials. And so we are continuing those conversations to understand what is the role of the Park District and what is the footprint of the training center on Park District's protected lands before advancing anything to the board for support. And welcome back, Eric.
Yeah,
Good explanation.
thank you. I trust that Lisa covered it thoroughly.
She did terrific. So envision a residential camp of somewhere between 20 and 30 Corps members versus a campus with hardscape, with fire towers that would accommodate 50 to 100 formerly incarcerated people. So that's sort of the rub. And yes, the visions that were shared, there was an incongruity in visions that just never only more recently came together, that it's probably fundamentally incompatible with the district's mission, what is being suggested from the Senator's office. But we're certainly welcome to more conversation.
Got it.
Okay, any other questions about this? They sound quite different projects and certainly might have some issues with neighbors of parks. Dennis?
Well, has there been any discussion with the Conservation Corps who, that's what I heard also, that they wanted to train young people in being firefighters and without such a big scale to it. Are they still interested in doing that? Because I think it still makes a tremendous amount of sense.
Absolutely. And so that was the first site that we discussed, which would be a housing facility to do in-park trainings for 2 crews of 15, which of 18 to 25-year-olds for just that purpose.
That's certainly what I remember hearing about something like that. And I think that would be more within the mission of the Park District. Okay, but there will be more information. Okay, we're going to just watch that. That's acceptable to everyone?
Yes.
We'll get more feedback from Eric later or from Lisa. Who knows? We'll wait and see. Other state matters.
So our last issue is very emerging and I think important. You will receive a presentation about it at the workshop next Friday, so we won't go too in depth here. And it's really a fire department, to some extent stewardship, government affairs, public affairs, cross-divisional concern. But we are seeing a tremendous amount of tree mortality and vegetation mortality in our parks. And I know Director Waspy is probably looking at it out his door at Anthony Chabot. But it is, it's fairly widespread, and it's going to be extremely expensive to eradicate the dying trees. And there's some concerns also about how to do that, in the sense that we don't really know what's causing the impact, whether it's a pathogen. We think climate change definitely is contributing. So there are a number of factors, and if it is a pathogen, do we need to eradicate and dispose of the material on site? And if we're doing that, are we just putting, you know, dead trees that are upright to more fuel on the ground? So there's a lot of complexities here, and a lot of research by our stewardship and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and CAL FIRE is going into it. It is estimated that just in Lake Chabot, Anthony Chabot alone, $30 to $40 million to eradicate the dying trees there. So we've elevated this, thanks to Doug and his team. We elevated this to CAL FIRE and their actual state fire chief, Tom Porter. It was clear in our meeting with him, this was back in February, that he had not heard of this issue, but it was also clear he was alarmed by it. So we got their attention, and their regional director, Ed Ori, has now engaged with us on trying to establish a regional meeting to discuss the issue, because we think it is in other spots and definitely has the potential to go to other spots. It's definitely on other people's lands, like East Bay Mud and other East Bay properties that we've identified. So we're looking forward to working with the, well, we need to work with the state and maybe even federal level. Peter asked me for more information about it, because there are some federal bills on fire going through. But it's also an issue where we're going to have, people are going to know, people are going to notice. So we really have to,
I think so.
We really have to do something and be active on it. So we've asked Doug to, the state legislature is moving forward with some fire funding from ahead of the budget process, the regular timelines of the budget process. So we've asked Doug to look into, is there a way to put, provide some resources to agencies like ours on SkyOff so that we can get going on some of the work, because we just simply don't have the funding right now. The other issue is that we're continuing to educate not only CAL FIRE and our state delegation. This has come up in a couple of our meetings with our legislators. We're planning a meeting with the Deputy Resources Director, I believe, Lisa, that's has fire under her purview. So government affairs definitely has a role, but I do want to emphasize that Eileen and the fire team are really our lead counsels on this, and you'll be hearing much more from her on next Friday.
Questions? Dave?
Yeah, is it possible to have the Eagle take pictures of the trees, the tree mortality on district lands? I think that would be very helpful. Pictures are worth a thousand. I know there was a really good article in Bay Nature and had pictures of other properties out around the regional parks, but not our parks in particular. And then I think we should be looking forward to, because we share a lot of lands with East Bay Mud. We should probably look to form some kind of coalition with them.
Dennis, did I see your hand up?
Well, yeah, I agree with Dee, and I'm wondering though, Dee, was that the Bay Nature articles? It's interesting. I'm wondering if the contrast is enough. I mean, it's very, very stark when you look at it horizontally. Photos horizontally tell a great picture. I mean, you can just look up the hillside literally out my window, like Eric said, and it's very, very stark. And just another comment, it's interesting when we were talking about the two bills that are to calculate or to quantify or to mark out how fire prone areas throughout the state, and then have a plan. Good God. When we include this, those 77,000 fence line neighbors in the Park District are going to be coming at us with pitchfork, because everybody's going to be, and I was interested, and I know the insurance commission that we're going to be talking about, that's going to meet with the scientific community, fire community, and CAL FIRE to designate these fire prone areas. Good Lord, the insurance companies, when they see these reports, I think will cancel everyone in masse throughout the Bay Area. It's going to be a real interesting situation. Tragic one, I think.
Yeah.
I can take this offline, but Lisa and Eric, so presumably the mud people, East Bay Mud, are experiencing the same sort of die-off, right?
Yeah, they have to be.
I guess I'd like to say, can this be the only place where this tree mortality is taking place in California?
It's not.
Then you've got to get everybody together. You need a map that shows where it's going on. And maybe you need photographs of all of them. I don't know what. But
Yeah, Director Rees-Kemp, that's a great point. And I think that I might not have said it directly enough, but that is what we from a government affairs perspective, that is what we see happening. We see the need for CAL FIRE to really step up and take a statewide approach to this. And I think also we discussed the other day about possibly the federal side of it. So Dee, to your point, I mean, we should be in conversation with East Bay Mud, but it's bigger than even just the two of us, right? It's something we really, I think we want to elevate it to the state level and make sure that we're looking at it more holistically and have approach that, that we're not necessarily, we may be the leaders in terms of identifying it, but I don't need a statewide eradication effort. So I think we really just need CAL FIRE and others at the state level to really have this on their radar and make sure that there's a broader coalition looking into it and also looking into how we're going to finance it.
again, the bottom line is, I'm sorry, a tree next to a tree, whether it is a state or a federal, if it's dying, it's going to be just as likely to burn. So somebody ought to be talking to somebody about the federal level trees. How many acres do we have owned by the federal government? I don't know, an awful lot.
Well, I think it's about half of the public land in California.
It is. Yeah.
Maybe even more. But yes, I know you had mentioned that, and we are in conversation with Peter. I just talked to him, I think it was yesterday or day before yesterday, and so we will be providing that information to him.
And I suspect it's going to go potentially up the coast to another state or two. I don't know, I haven't been there, but the cost of fires is just incredible. We've seen that the last few years here, and anything spent to prevent that. It's not just the woods, it's all the people, it's the property, it's the cities. We'll see if we can all get our act together. It's not going to be easy or cheap, right? Solve it, Eric. Go for it. We have a high expectation. Okay, anything else we need to hear from the state?
Dennis had a question.
Okay. Then we are open for public comment. Yuli, do we have any?
No public comments at this time. Again, let's just.
I think Rochelle.
Oh, sorry. Oh, I just saw Rochelle.
And I'm also not sure if Dennis had his hand up for public comment or if he had a question. But I think.
Okay. All these little windows on the screen. It's really.
Well, there are lots of little windows. We're very busy
Yes,
Okay.
I'll
Rochelle?
be really quick. Yes, this is Rochelle Mason from Albany, and I wanted to see if anybody wants this in microcosms, and yet up close. If you happen to be on Interstate 80 in the Albany vicinity, which is basically, Berkeley to El Cerrito and Richmond, look off of Interstate 80 at Albany Hill. The eucalyptus on Albany Hill used to be the same color as the oak. Now the eucalyptus are brown and the oaks are green, and it's very visible. And we have hired a consultant to look into it. He's sending up drones, and we're going to be learning about it. But it's even in that microcosm, it's an hellacious problem for the neighborhood and the state. Thanks.
Yeah.
If it's not a drought, it's something else. Okay. Anything else to be brought up? Thank you for attending, Rochelle, and we appreciate, I'm not sure I appreciate that information, but I sure understand it. And it's an easy place to see. So thank you so much for attending. Anyone else have anything to add for the good of the order? Dennis.
Yeah, I was wondering, does anybody quantify the amount of acreage of trees we have from Anthony Chabot all the way to Richmond that could be affected by this? I like to use the reference of my neighbors when they're talking to me about it. And I go, oh, we have a potential of 30,000 acres of dead trees from here to Richmond. I think that's high. But,
You want a more realistic number?
Yeah.
Okay.
My understanding, based off of the last report I saw, is it is about 100,000, or not 100,000. I will double check, but I will get back to you.
Get back with
I know we have it.
The most accurate number and how we got it. How's that?
Can I ask Director Wasby, are you asking how many trees are in our plan or how many are currently compromised or dead?
No, I always like to go to the worst case scenario. I'm thinking of every single tree, and I know it's quantified somewhere, and somebody's got it from here, from Castro Valley up to Richmond, which are WUI essentially.
Okay.
Yeah, and thank you. If we can find that out, it'd be interesting.
Yeah, because I know they've quantified how many we think are dead that we've seen so far, but I think you're asking for the bigger number, so we'll get and may know it.
So I got it up. So areas impacted to date that our fire team has been able to proactively determine is 1,505. But I do want to give the caveat that this does include East Bay mud lands. So without East Bay mud land on district land alone, it's approximately 1,000 acres.
Okay.
And that's the impacted acreage, Dennis. So we'll try to get you the bigger number as well.
Okay, great. And one other thing, I hate to put Doug on the spot, but I love his analysis, and I think this is the best part of this legislative committee. Doug, can you tell us what's going to happen with this recall, or what do you think's going to happen?
You wanted to predict.
Well,
I mean, it sounds as though they've got the requisite signatures. They got over 2 million. I don't recall what's required. So, and I don't even know exactly the window in which the recall is going to be called. I think it's the latter part of this year. It'll fail miserably. I think everything's trending a lot more favorably for Mr. Newsom if he can keep himself away from the French Laundry for the next months.
That was an expensive
and stop consorting with the likes of people like me. And, he'll do just fine. I don't know about residual effects and what this does to his legacy one way or another. I mean, it could ultimately help to bolster him and his image nationally if he comes out victorious in a strong way. But I don't know. I think everybody should be comfortable and confident knowing that he will continue in his position as governor. I don't know if you're familiar with how the recalls work, but essentially it's a question, yes or no, And then if it's, we don't want you any longer, Gavin, then you identify who you would like in his stead, or yeah. So I think he's fine. He's got to mind his P's and Q's for a little while. And obviously with coronavirus, you know, the case rates going down, reopenings maybe a little expeditiously happening right now, for political reasons, maybe not, I don't know. I think he's going to be just fine.
Great, thank you. I'm very cynical. I was thinking, is there any opportunity? I know he needs to garner favor, and he's done a pretty good job with the school districts or the teachers unions. Could we get some fire money out of him easily?
Are you trying to leverage? Oh, I see.
No.
He needs all the friends he can get.
Well, I think personally, considering the difficulty of this past year, he's done an amazing job. I'll give him a free lunch or two and not worry about it too much. But I think most of the voters will be there. I look at some of the other governors. Look at the governor of Texas. Come on. And one way back east. I won't even go there.
Yeah.
Anyway, Dee.
I just wanted to comment. I think kudos to Eric and Lisa and Doug. These presentations are very timely, I think, because the outreach and the surveys, particularly, have to be part of our considerations for going forward with the tax measure for the Park District. And then I think we have to really look at 2022 as a possibility. And even if we don't go at 2022, 24, that means we have a lot more data and a lot more projects and then with things in mind. The other project I was thinking was the Build project. It's so serendipitous that it's landing at the right time. We've identified projects ahead of time. These are all things that we can use in the possibility of a district-wide tax measure, which we all know we all need to ensure the growth of the Park District. So I just really want to thank you for thinking forward. And really our feet's on the ground, and I think it wouldn't be much of a pivot to if the board decides to go with the tax measure for 2022 that we'd be ready. So I really thank you for being forward thinking and being very innovative. Very much appreciated.
Thank you, Dee. Eric, would you like to remind us of what we're going to get a report on at the workshop?
Sure. So Lisa has done a great job of gathering data throughout the district for our monetary needs. So, you know, everything from our deferred maintenance to pavement to opening up land bank property. And I'll let her tell you the number, but it's big.
I'm not sure I'm ready for that, but okay.
And then the second part of the presentation is intended to be a conversation about some of the survey work we've done recently.
Okay.
Meaning December 2020, with an eye toward what the timeline would look like if the board did elect to suggest November 2022 on the ballot. And I'll let Lisa speak a little bit more to that, to the timeline and to the need for the Park District.
Okay, Lisa?
Happy to. Surprise presentation. So just really quickly, based off of the top of my head, our rough estimated numbers for annual needs for the Park District. So this is looking at our pipeline FTEs, looking at areas of the Park District that we could open with additional full-time staff equivalent. So from our planning team. And then lastly, looking at pavement, wildfire protection and ongoing stewardship needs. So these are annual costs, which are the goal of a parcel tax. These are about $60 million annually for needs for the park district based off of just some rough data poll over the past 2 weeks. And then looking at like one-time capital investment, which is in, let's see, it's our deferred maintenance, which is about $89 million of deferred maintenance from restrooms and buildings and a lot of the WPA original infrastructure. And if you also add to that our shoreline infrastructure needs, our capital project, so I think some of the visitor centers that are already in the pipeline, not new visitor centers, but the ones that we're already kind of looking towards at Point Pinole and Concord and others. It's about $600 million of one-time capital investments that the Park District is currently in need of. And this number is not including land acquisition. So I have a number of caveats. So it's our deferred maintenance, our one-time sea level rise investments, which then would need maintenance and move into the maintenance category. And then looking towards the timeline, Eric and I, at the conclusion of Measure FF, were sort of, well, what do we do now? And what we did was we documented what was accomplished during the time leading up to Measure FF. So should the board want to turn towards a November 2022 ballot measure, and to President Rosario's point, getting our ducks in a row for 2022 could only benefit a future election. The timeline would be over the next 3 months, expanding on the research with finance and management, with our acquisition, stewardship, and development, and our operations team to understand the staff needs, the funding needs internally that could lend itself to a successful project list. Also getting general manager and board input of priorities. After about 3 months, we then would have about 4 to 5 months of doing external stakeholder and public engagement. So to the point earlier of how we can use the Center for Regional Change study to guide a parcel tax investment, understanding the barriers, understanding the needs and wants of infrastructure and programming within our community could help guide that commitment list. So we take about 4 months to develop a commitment list with public input. At that point, we'd be ready to bring a draft list before the board. This would also have some survey input and others. And in January of 2022, the board would take a vote to approve a draft commitment list. This vote would then be posted on our website for about 3 to 4 months so that the public can see it. It would provide for transparency. And in March of 2022, the board could take a formal vote to move forward for the November 2022 ballot, at which point staff can no longer engage. And of course, during all of this time, our public affairs team can be doing a fantastic public engagement and education program. And so in March of 2022, you could take a vote, and then it would transfer to an external campaign to approach the November 2022 ballot.
I hope we're not asking for all the funding you just mentioned, because I have a feeling it would not pass. I don't need to do a survey of anyone, but I'm sure we're going to be more reasonable than that.
Yeah, so we have done some initial revenue projections that I would be happy to share. So for $1 a month, thanks to our finance and management team, we were able to identify $1 a month district-wide could bring in a little over 10 million annually, which the board could then make a choice. Do we want to do $1, $2? Of course, government affairs could help provide some input from a voter survey on what number threshold our public would be supportive of. And then additionally, it would be to the board's discretion, what number of years is that? Is that a $1 a month for 10, 20, 30 years? When will it sunset? So a lot of choices. And at the board workshop, we'll be preparing a matrix of what these options look like for you all to review.
And I can also say out here in this part of the world, I would assume we would be looking at entities like LARPD, who certainly desperately needs funding to share in this endeavor. And I think if you wanted support, Livermore likes their parks, but there a lot of things are now missing because of LARPD's financial situation. And I'm not aware of all the details up in Contra Costa County, but I'm sure there's some there too. So you've got a lot of work in front of you, and then we'll have some interesting choices.
Absolutely. And I do want to emphasize, we don't do this work alone in government affairs. So a thank you to our AGM, Deborah Ocker, for all of her guidance so far. And then of course, all of our team members, Carol Johnson, and so many. We never work in a silo in government affairs. We are a division dependent on our cross-divisional work. So
if
just
you don't
so much support across the board.
You're crazy, right? We know that. You go to Deborah and the gang. Okay, anything else? Then I would say that we've had an excellent meeting. Thank you all, informative. And they've laid out more work for us in the future, fellow directors. But that's okay. That's why we're here,
I'm
right?
just gonna be happy I'm not going to be president in 2022.
Isn't it interesting how suddenly some positions say, nah, I'd rather just hide in the background.
There'll be no hiding if we have a district.
You can't hide. You can't hide, but
Yeah.
you won't have to be right in the front. Look at it that way. Anyway, you do just fine. I have confidence. Okay. With that, we'll wait for, well, we're going to see some of the gang again at the workshop, right? So thank you very much for a great meeting. Have a wonderful weekend. Let's hope for a little more rain. How's that?
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, have a good weekend.